Hi, this is Lydia Jacovat from the Rossland Museum, and I'm here today with Bob Flegel. And today is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2014, and I'm doing the Rossland Memories Project. And I'm just quickly going to ask Bob if we have his permission to record his stories.
Certainly do.
Thank you very much, Bob. And so let's start with, tell me where you were born, when you were born, and a little bit about your family.
All right, I was born in Trail, BC during the war, Second World War, and came to Rossland when I was 4 years old, after my dad got out of the army, and we moved up here, and we lived down on Columbia Avenue, right above where the bin wall is now, and that's where I was raised with my other four brothers and my sister, and in a big neighborhood with lots and lots of kids, and that's where I was until I left home and got married.
So before you go on to that, Bob, can you tell me who your parents were and where they came from?
My mother was a Bissett, and Marjorie, and she came and was born in Trail. And my dad's name was Bill Flegel, and he was born back in a little town in Saskatchewan called Grayson, and moved here when he was very young to Nelson, and then to Weimar, where he worked in the Weimar mines before he started at Cominco. And he worked at Cominco till he went into the Second World War. And then when he came back, we moved to Rossland.
Very neat. So, and you mentioned you had siblings. Would you mind letting us know their names?
Yeah, I had my sister Priscilla. She was the next oldest. She was 3 years younger than me. And then I had a brother Tom, another brother Rick, another brother Ted, and my youngest brother, 19 years younger than me, named Bill.
Tell me about your schooling, where you went to school.
I went to school, and when I started in kindergarten, actually, I started on Columbia Avenue, where the old Esso station used to be on the corner, and kindergarten was in there, and it was old Mrs. Coombs. That was the kindergarten teacher. Then in grade 1, I went to school at the Cook Avenue High School, which it still was back then, but they had one room in the basement for grade 1. So I spent my first year down at Cook Avenue, and then I went up from a grade 2 to McLean School, and because there were so many kids, they had the annex divided off into 2 or 3 classrooms, and that's where I was, in the annex for grade 2. Then in grade 3, I ended up back down at Cook Avenue School, because by then Cook Avenue became the elementary school, and the new high school that's up on Washington Street opened. And I did my elementary school, remainder of it at Cook Avenue, and then I went to Rossland High School till grade 10, and then I went down to Crow for 10, 11, and 12, where I took a vocational program.
You mentioned that you got married. Tell me how you met and who you met and your children.
Got married. I met my wife in 1963, and her name is Patsy Piggin, and she came from a family of 5 girls, and she was the second youngest. I met her up at the skating rink, tried to run over her on purpose, and that's how we met. And we were married in 1965, and we had 3 children, Tracy, who's the oldest, and Leanne, the middle child, and Robert, who is the youngest. And of course now they're all grown up and on their own and spread out all over.
And they have grandchildren?
And
you have grandchildren?
I do. I have 4 grandchildren, Patsy and I do. We have 2 boys, Connor and Tyler, that belong to my oldest daughter, and they live in Ladner at the coast. And my daughter Leanne has a boy and a girl, James and Chloe, and they live in Rossland.
So now that we've got the basics, just very interested in any work you did around this area, or what kind of employment you had.
I worked when I was going to school. I worked at the bowling alley. I used to pin set there after school and on league nights. And I got a little bit older and I went to work for Super Value part-time. I used to go there after school and work from 4 till 6, and then I'd work on the weekends. And then I ended up, when I graduated from high school, I worked for Super Value for a year and a half. And then I gained employment with BC Tel, where I was for 35 years before I retired.
Where was BC Tel located?
Look, they had their main office in this area at that time was in Trail. Oh. And that's where I worked out of Trail. And I worked construction when I first started with the telephone company, so I worked all over the province. And then eventually I worked into installation and repair, which brought me home and kept me at home.
So you had your children here. Your children grew up here in Rossland?
All my kids grew up in Rossland.
So tell me a little bit about how you educated them about Rossland, schooling, and maybe some vacations and things they did here.
Yeah, my kids were all raised here in Rossland. They all went to school. They all went to school in Cook Avenue School, the same place that I went to school. That's where they all did their elementary education. And they all went to high school up here in Rossland. They all graduated from high school here. Robert, my youngest, went on to the University of Victoria, and then UBC, and then teacher training at Selkirk through UBC. My middle girl, Leanne, when she graduated, wanted to travel a little bit, and she went up to Edmonton and Red Deer, and she went to college in Red Deer for a year, and then came back and found employment here in Trail, and then eventually ended up at the Kootenay Savings Credit Union, where she's been for a long time. And my oldest daughter liked Vancouver. She went to go down to school down there in Capilano, and she stayed and then met somebody, and they got married and moved to the Ontario area, and then eventually ended up back in Vancouver at Ladner, where she is today with the 2 boys.
Any little stories you want to tell us about? Maybe you took them to the ski hill here at Red, or hiking, or any memories here for them?
Yeah, we used to have a place at Christina Lake, so we used to go to Christina Lake all the time for the weekend, and the weekends and on the holidays, and the kids just loved it. We did a trip to the Yukon for a month, camping. Now, sometimes you hear the stories from the kids and they'll say, well, I don't know whether that was the greatest trip in the world or not. And then sometimes they say, oh, I remember this and I remember that. And but most of the time we spent our summers at Christina Lake, and on the weekends, of course. And all 3 of my kids skied at Red Mountain. My oldest liked it the best, and she was a good skier. And the other 2 skied, I think, only because Mom and Dad made them go up there and ski. But they didn't mind it. We used to go up on Sunday mornings bright and early and go up there and have breakfast, which I think they liked the best of it all. And we'd have breakfast at the ski hill, and then we'd be out there for when the ski hill first opened and do our runs. And by 1 o'clock, when all the crowds were in, we were ready to come home.
Neat. So both you and your wife were skiers?
I was the skier. Patsy skied for about 2 or 3 years, and then that was enough for her too. She wasn't a real fan of skiing, but she tried it, which I got to give her a lot of credit for.
I didn't ask about Patsy. What was her profession? What did she work
Patsy worked for Michael's in Rossland, which was a clothing store. When I met her, she worked for Kresge's and Trail behind the lunch counter with Mrs. Edworthy. And then she came up here and got a job at Super Value, and she worked there. And then once we started having kids, then she stayed at home until the kids were grown and all in school, and then she went back to work, and she worked at Michael's clothing store, and then she worked for Super Value, and then she went down and she worked for Extra Foods and Trail.
Oh, wow.
And then she retired, like me.
Wow. So, any other stories about the railway would have been gone?
When I first came here, the railway was still here and the steam engines were still running.
They were.
And I can remember them stopping at the water tower down on Cook Avenue. And we used to go down there as kids and put pennies and nails on the track to flatten them. And the pennies the nails we used to flatten, and they'd make good arrowheads for our bows and arrows when we were kids and stuff like that. We had lots of fun listening and watching the steam engines puff their way up from Trail.
And they came up, what's now the 22? 3B22?
No, they came up, the one we saw, they came up from Trail up the old railroad bed on the South Belt and up and into Rossland and all the way up here onto 3rd Avenue. There was no, when I was a kid, the railroad going to Northport was long gone. The Great Northern pulled out probably in the mid-20s. They pulled out of Rossland and left, so that's beyond my memories. Other than the rail bed, a lot of the Patterson Highway is built on old Great Northern rail bed. And then I can remember going to Trail when I was a kid, driving down the Trail Hill. And the whole highway between Rossland right into downtown Trail was all concrete. A concrete highway right through all the way down Columbia Avenue, down to Trail, through Warfield, and right down through the Gulch into downtown Trail was a cement highway.
Cement.
And I could still remember it, concrete.
Concrete.
Yeah.
And now it's a different material.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
now it's all pavement and the road has all been changed and not as windy as it was. And remember the old water hole corner, and lots of, even with my dad, lots of times in the summertime we'd have to stop there and get some water and cool the car down before we could
So where was
go
that?
back up.
What location was the water hole?
The water hole was right where the gravel pit is, halfway down the Trail Hill. And there was a creek there, and that was called the water hole.
Oh, neat. And people used the water for?
Well, for cooling their cars when they were coming up the hill on the hot summer days. Yeah,
Oh,
It
wow.
would get too hot, the cars would start to boil over. So then they'd stop and cool down and get new water and fill them up and go the rest of the way.
And so that was supplied by the city?
No, it was just a creek.
It's a creek?
Just a creek that was there, and they called it the water hole.
Oh, neat. And the other, you mentioned water for the train. That was down on Cook Avenue.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to picture where.
It was right above the ballpark in that wide spot where cars park when they watch the ball games and stuff. Right there on the corner of Kootenay and Davis on the south side towards Cook Avenue.
Oh, right.
And that's where it was. Big old brown enclosed water tower.
Did you ever get a chance to go on the train? Did they ever let people on?
I never got on the train here in Rossland. No, I rode the train from Castlegar to Vancouver when I was young, but I never rode any of the train up here at Rossland. Watched them, but never rode them.
Never rode them.
Yeah.
So your memories of Rossland growing up here, you would have seen a substantial amount of changes. So let me know what you remember about the stores downtown and your favorite stores.
Oh, I can remember Hunter Brothers store, which is the ex-Pro Hardware now. I can remember when it was Hunter Brothers and it had a side door on Washington Street. We used to come down from school, and when we were still in grade 2, and we come through the side door and in by the candy counter, hoping there was some candies laying on the side of the counter we could whip off, and then out the front door of the building, and away we'd go. And I can still remember the old bus depot in Rossland, right in the same area where the Red Mountain has their right beside where Red Mountain has their office. I don't know what office is in there now. Now, was that, and then across the street, I can remember all the buildings across the street before they tore them all down to build what they call the Prestige now. I can remember lots of the fires because I was at lots of them. I can remember the fires that when the Rossland Minor and the Davies Transfer Building burnt on Columbia Avenue. When the Masonic Hall, kitty corner from the courthouse, burnt down. Can remember St. George's Anglican Church. I wasn't at that fire, but I can, worked at that fire, but I can remember it. The White Wolf Inn, just below the telephone office, when it burnt. The Allen Hotel was at that fire when it burnt. McLean School, all heritage buildings, all gone, just poof with fire. Yeah.
So when you said you were at the fires?
I was a volunteer fireman then.
Oh, yeah. So here in Rossland they had a volunteer fire at the fire hall. All there. Oh, wow. So that's quite a job.
I worked there. I was a volunteer fireman, and I was at all those fires, and it was good camaraderie. There was a lot of fun there. We used to only have fire practices 6 months of the year because of the snow and everything. So we used to practice from the 1st of May till Halloween. Halloween was our last fire practice night, and that's when we go out and do the patrolling and everything to make sure that everybody was good and not bad like we were when we were kids. And then the rest of the year we were off. We used to have a couple of big spaghetti feeds a year, and they were great fun, great camaraderie. It was a great group of guys. Yeah.
So I know you can't mention every cause of fire, but it just seems like a lot of fires. And what do you think was behind most of them?
A couple of them were suspected arson, and some of them I think just old buildings, turn of the century buildings.
Old
wiring, tinder dry. But some of them there was 2 or 3 that were suspected arson, but none of them proven arson. So you can't say it was that for sure. But some pretty spectacular blazes.
So you told me about the buildings that you remember. What about significant people? Teachers or mayors or owners of buildings? Do you have any memories of people?
Yeah, I remember old Harold Ellams. I think he spent more time as mayor than anybody else in Rossland. He was a neat old guy, and he used to have the old Butchateria store, which is where the Medical Associate Clinic is right now. And he used to have a little grocery and store and meat market there. And Harold was a great guy. I liked Harold. He was mayor. I actually spent 3 years on city council with Harold. And a good guy. Harry LaFay was another one. I spent time on council with old Harry LaFay. There's a guy that had the history of Rossland. I think born and raised here and stuff like that from the turn of the century. I'm a newcomer compared to some of those guys. I didn't get here till 1947.
Who was your favorite mayor of Rossland? Did you have a favorite?
I don't know. I actually even tried running once.
Hey!
I ran against Harry LaFay.
Oh, wow.
Actually, and I lost by 11 votes.
Okay.
But I don't know. I like Jackie. Jackie was a great lady. I thought she was a common sense lady. I like Jackie Drysdale. And I like Bill. Bill was a good friend and still is a good friend. And I like Bill Perfili. And Harold Ellams. I liked old Harold. He was a great guy. So yeah, there was several of them that. And Harry. Harry was good. I liked Harry too. They had lots of interesting conversations with them, with history of the town and all that kind of stuff.
And now I know you're quite the hobbyist with your model railways. Tell me how you got involved with that and where that is. And
yeah, we started in 2006. Two of us decided that we'd like to start a model railroad club, and we thought maybe we should do model railway, the history of the trains and stuff in Rossland. So we tried to round up some guys. We got 5 people and we formed a club, and we started the model railroad. We got some nice donations from service clubs and businesses, and from the substantial one from the Nelson District Credit Union, which got us started. And we worked down in my basement for a couple of years putting everything together, and then we moved it all up behind the brew shop in Rossland, where we continued to put it all together. And made it. It's all in the history of the 2 railroads that came into Rossland. The Great Northern, which came up from Patterson via Spokane, and of course the CPR, which came up from Trail, which originally was the Columbia Western. And we thought it'd be nice to do a model railroad that encompassed some history, so it had a story. It just wasn't some generic model railroad. And so it worked out quite nicely. And then Linda McDermott from the mall said, why don't you bring it down here and put it on display? We've got a room. So we moved down there in 2009 in September, and we've been there ever since. And we're open there 2 days a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. And we are now starting to take our layout on tour. We've been to Edmonton, we've been to Kamloops, we've been to Calgary. We're going back to Kamloops again. We've had it up here to the Fall Fair in Rossland. So yeah, it's been a great project, and it's been a lot of fun. And we were down when we first started. We had 5 members, and we lost 3 members, and we were down to 2. And then we got it down into the mall, and we hold our own at about 30 members now.
And you have a display at the museum too.
Yeah, I built a model of the Center Star Gulch trestle, and I had it in storage, and I thought it would be nice to put it somewhere where it can be seen. So it's at the museum now.
And it's awesome.
Thank you.
It's awesome. Love it. Have you got any stories about, Rossland or the Nancy Green area or any of the surrounding area that you visited or that you knew about or you saw being developed?
I don't know. I just seen a lot of changes happen in Rossland over the years, like a lot of buildings that have slowly disappeared and other buildings that have come up. I'm kind of sad to see the bank move out, and we don't have a Bank of Montreal anymore. I mean, one of the first banks that ever came into the area was built here in Rossland, was the Bank of Montreal. That was a nice building. I liked that. And I liked it when it was all fixed up as a bank. I'm glad to see the government spent money and fixed up the courthouse. That's a grand old building. A lot of houses. We had a lot of really nice old houses that I can remember when I was a kid that had clapboard siding and all that kind of stuff, and they were more historical. And then in the late 50s, these outfits came through selling asbestos shingles and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of houses got changed and lost the character that they had. There's still some real nice ones above the Esling Park Manor up here. There's 2 or 3 nice old buildings that are still up there, houses. But a lot of them have gone, and a lot of them have changed from what they were. I can remember my friends in the neighborhood when we were young growing up, and my mom and all the other neighbors' mums would say, "Oh no, you can't go up the mountain. No way, you got to stay away from those mines." "Yep, Mum, we sure will. We're just going for a hike." And away we go up the mountain, and then in those days all the mine tunnels were still open, or they were big pits where you could go up there, and we used to go up and go to one of the mines, like say the Center Star or something, and drop rocks down and see how long we could hear the rock before it finally stopped or went out of hearing range, or up by the old War Eagle and roll them down into that big pit and listen for them to fall. We used to go into some of the old tunnels wear out and lose more of my dad's flashlights and stuff like that going into the tunnels. I don't know how we ever made it back out, and one of the flashlights still worked when we would do that, but it was fun.
Horrible.
We can remember going along. I remember walking along in a tunnel when it's dark and we got the little flashlight, and a friend and I are walking along, and we're walking right along on the rails from the mine cars, the rail tracks, and we're walking in between those, and then all of a sudden my friend disappeared, like that, and here he was hooked under his shoulder pits like this on the rail on the train tracks, and we'd walked right over and into a drift. So we scrambled and got him pulled out, and then back out we went. But yeah, I mean, those were the days when you could do that, and the parents would always warn you, but they never knew what you did up there. We built lots of crates when we were kids, and stuff like that, and race them down all the hills in Rossland. Used to have fun rolling old tires down lots of the hills in Rossland, stuff like that. Things like that were fun,
Did you get into any of the cabins? Do you remember the cabins up on the hill?
We used to go, actually we built cabins up on Red Mountain, and then we used to go up to the cabins in Squaw Basin when we were young. And but Squaw Basin in the springtime and the summertime was so full of bugs and flies, but it was still fun going up there. I can remember skiing when I was 12 years old and doing the torchlight run off of Red Mountain, and we used to come down the face of Red Mountain and then down and onto the gas line and down into Black Bear, carrying those torches. That was fun. That
in
was
both hands.
One in each hand. You'd have one in each hand on your ski poles, and away you go.
Okay.
That was lots of fun.
Oh, neat.
Actually, I did that when I was 12 years old. Yeah. Be 2 or 3 of us young kids, and then the rest were all older. When I say adults, I don't know. They could have been 16 or 18. When I was 12, they were old.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've taken a lot of your time, Bob, and we do appreciate all your stories, and we thank you, and we will be putting these on the web, hopefully, and also keeping them in the Rossland Museum in the archives there. And once again, thank you very much for your stories.
Thank you.